Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar, How Person-Centered Care Can Improve Long-Term Care, presented by CareScout. I'm Jenna D'Angelo, and I'll be moderating this webinar. Today's panelists, I'd like to start off by introducing them. First, we will have Philip Gillick, Vice President, Provider Network at CareScout, Gretchen Alkema, President, Wolf Eagle Enterprises, LLC, and we also have Bill Winfrey, Director, ATI Advisory. You can read their full bios on the left side of your window by selecting the Speakers tab. Just a few notes before we begin. You can access closed captions from the bottom right corner of the video player. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available to watch on demand within 24 hours. We'd love to hear from you. During the presentation, please submit any questions you have using the Questions and Answers tab on the left side of your screen. Time permitting, we will conclude with a Q&A session. Okay, let's begin. Philip, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jenna. Appreciate everyone being here, and I am going to try and stay on time because I'm really excited to try and get a lot of audience participation questions. So I'm going to try and really keep my eye on the time. But thanks again, everyone that's joined. I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about CareScout and why we exist and what our aspirations are and what we're trying to do. Before you have the agenda, it looks long, but I promise we're going to get to a lot of panel discussion as well as audience questions. Okay, we can go next. So, simple mission, right? Our mission at CareScout is to simplify and dignify the aging experience. So with that, I will err on the side of potentially oversharing, but my own experience with myself and my siblings trying to manage my father's long-term care, I would say my sister's a nurse, and I hope none of my siblings are on this. I don't think they are, but I would say in that journey, we would score probably a D on how we did with getting him access to care and understanding long-term care, et cetera. So the reason I share that is at CareScout, we always like to lead with why. Why did we join CareScout? Why are we jumping on this train to try to improve and dignify the aging experience? And there's very many of us that either have gone through long-term care with loved ones or heading towards it ourselves. So the organization itself is really built around people that want to make change and really want to help in this kind of aging journey that we all will be going through. Next, thanks. So a component of what CareScout is doing is a digital platform. You're going to see a slide coming up on a marketplace to really help on the aging journey. But for today's webinar, there is I'm hoping a lot of long-term care providers that are either know about CareScout or working with CareScout or want to learn about CareScout. So I just wanted to spend a few minutes on these 4 bullets that kind of talks about the value proposition of the CareScout Quality Network. CareScout will be working with long-term care insurance providers and carriers to connect care seekers with high-quality, person-centered care, long-term care providers. So the connection between care seekers and providers is obviously a value proposition. In addition, and we're going to get to a lot about person-centered care today, we are really excited about taking what I would call the person-centered care journey with our providers and recognizing providers that are doing really well and working with providers that need a little bit of extra help in getting to be more person-centered. So the real core and what CareScout views as kind of the North Star of quality for long-term care providers is person-centered care, and we're really carrying that banner throughout everything that we're doing. Providers that do decide to join with us will have plenty of opportunities and education and learnings and the ability to strengthen our person-centered care practices. We are taking I came from more from a health plan background, but we're taking a much more of a collaborative approach to providers, recognizing that in certain parts of the world, person-centered care is much more recognized and much more common as a term. And so we are dealing with this in a collaborative way and saying we're going to learn from and with providers to try to raise all boats in the long-term care industry. And then kind of the last bullet there is really a little bit of a thank you for participating providers that are with CareScout. We know we have a vigorous credentialing process, but we want to thank you for sticking with us through that process and agreeing to join us on this journey of discovering around person-centered care. So we can go to the next. So the building block is really the CareScout as maybe what some would call the connector between care seekers and person-centered care providers. And we're working with a carrier that's got more than 1 million long-term care insurance policyholders. So that is a great audience for us to begin with. It's not where we're ending at CareScout, but that's just really more the beginning of who we'll be working with. Next. So I talked a little bit about the CareScout Quality Network and the providers that would be in it, which would be specifically long-term care providers. So assisted living, nursing facilities, home care, home health, adult daycare, adult foster care. We are starting with home care, but building off of that will be a full long-term care network. But in tandem with that is our go-to marketplace for care seekers. It could be also called a digital platform, or it's really where we're hoping that care seekers or people that aren't seeking care yet, but trying to understand what's happening with their loved one or their parent that's got maybe some early indications of needing help. Really a home for those folks to learn about what's up and coming on this aging journey for their loved one or themselves. So it's not meant to be just a platform to go in and find providers. It also provides a lot of education and navigation help to care. It's for the care seeker, but also really critical that it helps the family as well. You can go to the next slide. So as far as person-centered care and why we are really so excited to begin this journey and kind of work collaboratively with providers is that we really think it's a fundamental way to improve care in long-term care. And so what you have in front of you and me, is kind of the building blocks of how we went on this journey at CareScout and when we wanted to invigorate and change and really look at quality in another way, we said, what about person-centered care makes us feel like that's the way to go? So I'm not going to read the slides, and we are going to have a robust panel discussion. So folks that have, I just want to give folks a chance to read this and also think of your questions. If you see something on here, you're like, oh, I'm not sure that I buy into that, or you've neglected to mention this. It's not meant to be a comprehensive list of all the great things about person-centered care, but it really is a primer for providers who may be starting the journey in person-centered care and are very focused on customer satisfaction, but don't know how to kind of keep an eye on customer satisfaction, but pivot a little bit towards person-centered care. So we may go back to this slide in the panel discussion, but I just wanted to kind of share why we think it's so important. Better patient and community experience. Patients feel much more engaged when their values and beliefs are taken into consideration. There's a lot of studies around, we're going to talk a lot about workforce in a little bit, but the better workforce experience and improved well-being of the caregivers. And this is a critical component of person-centered care that's not always the first thing that gets discussed, but how, when we're being very person-centered with our clients, how are we also making sure that we're being maybe human-centered or person-centered with our employees and helping them navigate how to become more person-centered? What are the supports that providers put in place for their caregivers? Because for many caregivers, they may have gone into this industry thinking it's going to be one thing, and now the pivot to becoming more person-centered care can feel a little bit daunting. So we think once that person-centered care is embraced at all levels in the organization, the workforce will be potentially happier. Better clinical outcomes that really match, not always necessarily what the patient, and you'll hear this in person-centered care, not necessarily always what the disease needs or the condition needs, but what the person wants. So we think it leads to better clinical outcomes that more closely align with what actually the care recipient or their family wants. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about this, the better value through lower cost of care. And there's a lot of studies that talk about person-centered care and healthcare waste and maybe not providing all the levels of testing and everything if it doesn't really match what the care recipient would want to have. It's specifically more, it's very true, of course, when you get towards end of life and palliative care. Okay, you can go to the next. So now I'm going to introduce my esteemed colleagues here, who you heard their intros before. I want to talk a little bit and pivot, and I'm going to be calling on you too, so get ready, is to go to the next slide to talk about how our how is the industry looking at person-centered care? So you have up there the definition that CareScout came up with for what we believe about person-centered care, the partnership, the values and beliefs. But it's also I would say finally, if you've read about person-centered care in Asia and Canada and other countries, they were a little bit further along than us, maybe some say. So, but I do feel like, and this is for the panel, I do feel like it is getting to be more well known. CMS has a blurb on their website about it. They don't specifically have measures yet that I'm aware of that really specifically tie back to it. So maybe they'll look at what we're doing to adopt that. I mean, who knows? But anyway, I wanted to hear from the panel is why do you think person-centered care is getting more traction now?
Yeah, I'm happy to start, and Gretchen, if you want to follow. I think one of the things that's at the heart of that is a broader societal movement in terms of recognizing the diversity of the population that we have. So one of the things that we've seen in our work that sits at the center of person-centered care is really understanding who that person is and where they're coming from and the experiences and background that they bring to the table. And so as we look at the broadening of diversity in the population, and particularly for the aging population, as we have a greater diversity in the population that is getting to the point of needing long-term care, there's this increasing recognition of the need and the value that diversity brings to the workplace, to the lives and the richness of the lives of these individuals who are going out and seeking this care. So I think a major driver behind it is that increasing level of diversity that we see, and societally, the broader interest in recognizing and embracing and really celebrating the diversity that folks bring to the table.
Thank
Gretchen,
you,
I want to
Bill.
give you an opportunity, or yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Philip. And thank you for including us both in this conversation about person-centered care. From my sense, we're in a very different place generationally in terms of those individuals who are seeking care, as well as the caregiver provider set who is supporting their loved ones. Historically, people look to doctors to tell them what to do and to give them direction, and they look to them not in an advisory capacity, but in a directional capacity, and would either take that direction and or not and move forward. And healthcare today, long-term care today, is really much more of a partnership. And I appreciate how you have partnership in your definition, because it is a back and forth. It is this space that lives between the personalization desires of any individual care recipient based on their needs, values, preferences, and goals, and hopes for what the next days, months, years of their life will look like in light of chronic health conditions and oftentimes significant functional impairment by the time that they're needing this level of support. So you have all of that personalization on one side. On the other side, we have all the standardization of healthcare, all the checklists, all the regulations, all the requirements, all the, at the state level, at the federal level, sometimes at the local level, sometimes within partnerships and delegated relationships of healthcare providers. So there's this tremendous amount of structure that is about standardizing the care experience. And when I think about person-centered care, it's that glue that works in between those two joints and allows for fluid exchange of that person's desires and needs to be front and center in that care experience, while acknowledging that healthcare providers are living within standardized processes, and there's tensions that happen on personalization for the individual and their family. And having those conversations that puts the individual's needs, values, and preferences at the center of that experience just helps that entire structure stay solid and work for everyone involved.
I think my just telling on myself a little bit in my experience in my past lives, we did a lot of work developing what you're talking about, like practice guidelines, and so excited to share those out with providers. Great, this is we've done our due diligence, and this is what you're going to do when you have a CHF patient. Everyone gets this, and you're going to do this, and it's going to kind of de-risk you. And I think it's just having hindsight, looking at that. I worry that some of that may have caused some of this over standardization almost, because it was really checking, like, did you do chest X-ray? Do you do this? Do you do that? Because everyone needs that. And now we're needing, like, wait, now we're trying to pull back a little bit. So I guess I'm just like confessional, telling on myself a little bit, because those were created for good reasons, and just now it's maybe a little bit of ratcheting back of that a little bit.
Mhm.
Is that I think that's kind of what you were alluding to as well. And so I maybe was part of the problem back when I would work on those, but yeah.
And I wouldn't even say it's
Yeah.
ratcheting back, it's or pushing it forward. It's about acknowledging that there's the people space, the human space that lives in between an older individual or person, living with a chronic series of conditions and disability that still has that core humanity that is driving what the care experience is looking like, in honor of there are these standardization elements, and there are things that providers are seeking to do to ensure that there is equitable care delivered across, county, region, state, et cetera, throughout the Medicare program, the Medicaid program, or private insurance program like Genworth. And so both are needed. There needs to be a point, a fixed point that is associated with standardization of care, and another fixed point that is about the deepest personal desire of that individual, which, maybe they'd like to go back to a point in their self of full health and independence. And both of those things aren't going to fully exist. So how do we find that place that is in the middle and use it as that connecting point that is not fixed and rigid, but is solid enough to carry the care journey moving forward? And it's a balancing point at some level, but I would say even more than that, it's about honoring presence of the care individual, presence of the caregiver, presence of the care deliverer.
And not to negate that how needed it is throughout kind of the healthcare world, but I do feel really strongly, and what gets me very excited is that starting as we are now with long-term care and people in the aging process who often don't have a voice or aren't comfortable speaking up based on what you had talked about earlier, it makes me really excited about coming to work, in that we're going to be kind of first round is really helping to foster this for folks that maybe don't feel like they have a voice, or don't have a voice either literally or figuratively, but that kind of really gets me excited. And you do hear a lot about person-centered care in the disabled community and in elder care, so that gets me pretty excited. Do you, either one of you, remember when you first heard about person-centered care and what you thought it was? And I'd love for you to share that, and maybe if you when you're talking about person-centered care now, what are some of the common misconceptions?
Bill.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so Philip, the first thing that comes to mind is that quite a few years ago, I think the first term that I heard relevant to this was actually patient-centered care. And so it's been a really interesting learning process for me, understanding the differences between patient-centered care and person-centered care. And I think it reinforces a lot of what you and Gretchen were both saying, in that this concept of person-centered care is trying to step out of just the healthcare system and out of the provider-patient relationship, and recognize that there is a person there, and that person is not just the sum of the conditions that they have, but they're also the full history that they're bringing with them, and they're the person who is worrying about who is taking their child to school while they are hospitalized. It's bringing the full story of that person along with them, and so I would just say, I think that reinforces my appreciation for this emphasis on person-centered care as opposed to patient-centered care, because we know that all of these folks who are dealing with these healthcare challenges in their day-to-day lives have so much more going on than just what you see, what caused them to come into the long-term care setting, what caused them to come into the hospital. And we need to recognize and appreciate that those things have a role in our daily interactions with these folks. Gretchen, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, I mean, that was so beautifully said. And the thing that was coming to mind as you were talking is this kind of fundamental core of hospitality and stewardship that occurs at that care experience level, regardless of who the provider is. I think about Philip, you were talking about how CareScout really is kind of starting forth with the home care provider experience and older individuals and their caregivers. And I think about, what does it mean to be a really good guest in somebody else's home? And when we walk into somebody else's home, we're a guest in that home always. And the experience is about honoring that person, learning who they are and what really matters to them, so that they are seen and they are heard and they are understood and that they are valued and engaged, which in turn creates a willingness of engagement back from that individual. I've worked with families and caregivers for a really long time. I won't say the number of years. And it's difficult. Even when people know that they need care support, it is a difficult experience to walk that road of saying, I'm ready to have somebody come into my home and provide me support, even if they know they need it. And to have someone in that first entry walk in and really want to know who that older person is and how they can be of service and be a steward in that experience opens up that world that Bill was just talking about, of the inner person that is so far beyond the disease, the functional limitations, cognitive limitations, all the things that are so easy to pick up on and write in a chart in the healthcare realm.
I'll share, and I want you guys to maybe give me some observation on it. Some of the misconceptions that I run up against is a caregiver who is super busy, very taxed, maybe short-staffed, and has a lot to get through. And like, okay, now you want me to do this person-centered care stuff. What does that mean? And how can we make them more comfortable that it's not so much, it's not additive to your workload. It's a way to do work as opposed to extra work to do. It's not meant to be burdensome and like, all right, now you have these 3 other checklist things that you didn't have before. How have you seen folks make caregivers comfortable that the intention is not extra checking, extra stuff on top, because that can meet resistance and fear.
Sure. And when
I'm
thinking about caregivers, and I'm thinking you're talking about caregivers who are part of your network who are providing support to individuals, so they're not as opposed to family caregivers, correct?
Right. I'm sorry. Yeah, like a paid caregiver.
Yeah. Paid caregivers. Yeah. I ultimately think that the starting point of really getting to know who that individual is and orienting the engagement to that person's needs, goals, and preferences totally changes the care dynamic. My experience is that people who go into this line of work really have a heart for that kind of hospitality level support that they're delivering an older person, and that they want to be there with that individual and walk along this side of the journey with them. And how better to do that than to really know who that person is and be given the time at the front of that care experience, whether it be at the beginning of the assessment processes, how that screening goes through, at the beginning, but also being able to really have that moment of check-in each time we're walking in and saying, how are you doing today? We were working on this last time, or this was important to you last time. Is this important today? What's the most important thing to you? It doesn't have to be
such a sophisticated. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
We can go to the next slide because it's important. What we also wanted to reach out to long-term care. I'm trying to stay on time, and I'm not doing a great job. So we talked to long-term care providers about person-centered care. We surveyed 100 long-term care providers, and in the lower right of the slide, you'll see what percentages responded to the survey. So I want to get to some of these results because some of them were a little bit surprising to me, but I want to hear from the two of you. So we can go to the next slide, please. And sorry, Gretchen, I didn't mean to cut you off. If I did, I apologize. So we asked long-term care providers, 100 of them, right? What do they think about person-centered care? Because we were at CareScout, we were very excited that this is it, but we said, hold on, let's ask some other, get some well-rounded opinions. So you're going to hear about two things that we did to get this well-rounded opinion, and then this is what the results showed, that You'll see it right there. 95% of long-term care providers agree that the long-term care industry needs a better standard for measuring quality. And I would just add to that, what I hear when I'm talking to our network and out-of-network providers is that they need more around home care, but a better way to be recognized, because some of the Medicare stars and stuff like that doesn't speak to home care. So they also wanted a better standard and a standard. And then this one I was excited because I was excited about person-centered care, but 97% of long-term care providers agree that long-term care quality standards should include person-centered care measures. So not to lead the witnesses, but was this not surprising to you, these numbers, or what's your observation on that?
I'll start. This certainly isn't surprising to me. I think, particularly given the sample that you have, which had a heavy lean on nursing home providers, if I remember correctly from the previous slide.
Yep.
They are looking for good direction and guidance, given that they live on the standardization side of the ledger. Nursing home providers frankly look a lot more like hospitals in terms of the significant regulatory structures that are required of them. My guess is that even if you were to split these numbers across your provider types, you'd probably still have pretty high numbers, mostly because people are wanting to know, what does this mean and look like? And I will just offer up, some work that Mary Tonetti is doing out of Yale and others that has been very much on the healthcare end, but I think has a lot of connectivity to this work, which is, the focus on the individual's goals. What matters is, are goals acknowledged, addressed, and attained? And that is the center point of person-centered care, because it's about, if I'm the individual needing care, it's about what matters to me. And doesn't really matter what it is that what matters to me, but is care being oriented to what matters to me. That's the fundamental piece. And we have lots of tentacles in the measurement world and in the overall analysis world to get to the essence of how do you get to understanding what matters to me and measuring that. And I think that there's ways that we can do that and deliver it to these kinds of providers. Bill.
Yeah, that was great, Gretchen. And the only thing that I would add is that to Gretchen's dichotomy, I work on the healthcare side of the ledger, much more standardization, efficiency, things like that. And so when I think of if I were to put my shoes in one of the survey respondents, if I were to put myself in the survey respondents' shoes, when I think of quality from those perspectives, it is so often things like process measures. Was medication delivered at the right time? Did we avoid falls? Very kind of standardized things that don't allow for much of this incorporation of all that we're talking about in terms of recognizing the value of the people and the person-centered care that's being provided. So I think back to Philip's question, no, it's not surprising that there's this overwhelming support to try to move a bit beyond the standardized process measures to try to incorporate some of this thinking into quality measurement.
So do you crystal ball a little bit for the two of you? It's also natural that folks kind of managed what they get measured on and what they potentially get financially penalized on. So that's natural for any of us that were running a facility or an agency. How optimistic are the two of you that person-centered care type measures will be incorporated into CMS, Medicaid, Medicare Advantage plans, commercial plans, because that can really help this, if you want to call it a movement, that can really help this movement, that it's not considered just a cherry on top, that it's considered critical to assessing quality. How do you crystal ball that portion of it? I know change takes time and getting measures approved and sanctions takes time, but Gretchen, I guess I'll throw you that crystal ball question.
I'm very bullish in this arena. I'm very bullish in this arena. Now, what it will look like, I couldn't particularly say, but there's been a significant movement and significant resources in the philanthropic and healthcare and quality measurement communities have been working on this for many, many years. CMS is taking notice in terms of at the Innovation Center, their quality framework, their strategic framework, how they're investing in a whole range of initiatives. person-centeredness continues to bubble up, because I think it honors and acknowledges that there's an individual that is in a healthcare experience, and the factors that exist in and around their world and beyond have touch points on how that person engages with care, receives care, and participates in care. And so much of that is tied to how the person is perceived in that experience, and how they're perceiving that experience. And so to have this lensing of person-centered care woven throughout this, the kind of the transformation of healthcare and value-based orientation that we're going to be seeing even more so as we lead up to 2030, I like big check mark, yes.
Full from your lips, Bill.
Yeah, I would totally agree with Gretchen. I spent a decent portion of my career at CMS, and the fact that there is a website with language about person-centered care speaks volumes. Just thinking about the process that happens internally to get something like that on a website to show some level of endorsement of the concept, right? But all kidding aside, I think the other way that you see movement of this is that there's the consumer demand side, right? And so, Philip, I think that's a lot of what you're doing with creating this platform that consumers can see which providers have been certified in a way in being person-centered and offering person-centered care. And so you start to see folks vote with their dollars in terms of the providers that they go to, and that can drive movement as well. So I think, not only will there be some quality metric kind of regulatory movement in this direction, but also from a consumer demand perspective, you'll start to see movement in this direction as well.
Having worked with the Innovation Center when I was at a medical startup and CMS, it is not nothing just to get that blurb up on a CMS website. That really, for people that don't work in healthcare, I think like, okay, that's just like a blurb, but it was really heartening for me to see that. So that was, I think, super exciting. I want to go to the next slide because it's one of the critical questions that we asked in the barriers. So we did ask, yes, we got long-term care providers that said definitely this needs to be on the leaderboard, but what are some of the barriers? And what you see in front of you is that probably no surprise to folks, but staff retention, right, and workforce. So if you look at the numbers there, the survey did allow only one choice, so it was like a singular choice, so it doesn't mean that all of these issues aren't there, but you see that the employee retention was top of that leaderboard, and then regulatory standards, lack of standards for PCC, which is also critical, managing costs, employee training, and other. So a lot about workforce, right? So we wanted to kind of talk to the two of you a little bit more about workforce and risk, right? So recognizing that PCC is, some view it as sometimes in conflict with risk, right? And there's the risk of, and there's the standardized workflows and tasks, and then there's the risk of maybe not doing it that way because of the members' beliefs and values. And they're often kind of perceived as at odds, like standardized care and safe care versus what is the best, what the patient or the client wants to have based on how they want to live out their years or their values. How can providers and how can we help providers best kind of reframe that for their workforce so they're comfortable?
I think it's an enormous risk to not be engaged in a person-centered care as the ethos for long-term care providers, because for people who are at the point of needing significant levels of personal hands-on care, things in their world are probably not going to get better in the sense that the disease state's going to go away, that the significant disability that an individual is experiencing is going to go away. And so then it's about how do we help and walk alongside an individual in their life, kind of metaphorically walk alongside them as they are coping and dealing with this stage in their life and this stage of their health trajectory, and to not know what is important to that individual, to not know what are the most critical aspects of what care and support means to them, and to not orient the care experience toward those needs, values, and preferences, actually from my vantage point, creates a tremendous amount of risk for the home care provider, for the nursing home provider, for the assisted living provider, because it's to just live in the world of, well, we're doing these kinds of things because of particular standards of care without connecting that of honoring what those person's needs, values, and preferences are, creates a very big gap in conversation with the individual as their desires change, as well as with family members who are saying, walking in saying, what's going on? It's so much easier for providers, if a family member comes in who is out of state and says, well, what's going on? Being able to say, we talked with your mom, and early on, and we do this every time we check in, and she's saying this is what's most important to her, and we're guiding care and support along those lines. That changes the conversation, totally changes the conversation. So
Yeah, and what I would add to that is that I think information and terms like informed consent kind of come to mind in this context, where you think about a caregiver coming to the table, and if you think about from the caregiver's perspective, um, the concept of dignity of risk, and allowing decisions to be really person centered and driven by the care recipient. Um, in order to get a caregiver comfortable with that, I think they have to know what they're getting into as well, right? And they have to be understanding that this is a different way of practicing. This is kind of a brave new world that is really going to embrace the preferences and the decisions that are made by an individual. And in some cases, that may push beyond kind of traditional comfort zones that you were able to exist in to protect the populations that you worked with. But because of the organizational adoption of person-centered care, we need you to be comfortable with that.
Yeah. And one of the I want to tie to the next slide is that one of the barriers was also lack of standards. So I just want to talk a little bit about what CareScout is doing. It's not exactly standards, but it's adjacent to that. So we can go to the next slide. And Bill, get ready, because a lot of these are going to come to you. What we did at CareScout, again, we are contracting with providers that want to go on this journey with us, that will go through our credentialing process. They will offer a discount to CareScout members as part of the whole contract. But also I'm incredibly enthusiastic and pleased with is that we do have providers that have agreed to engage with us in a different way. And what that means is being vulnerable, in that our process for person-centered care surveys involves surveying both the care recipient about the provider's approach to person-centered care, but also surveying the line staff that are the direct caregivers. So the person-centered care survey that we're doing, and again, we're just going to be getting the beginning because this is brand new, baseline results, collaborating with providers based on how their scoring came out to see, like, hey, how can CareScout help you, help your staff get better? Or maybe they all score like super well and like we've done our work, but maybe not. So we will be having a lot of very active conversations with providers around the survey results. We're going to have something called CareScout Quality Care Provider. We're partnering with HCP to build out both the survey and our educational learning system. So I wanted to just, we came up with our first draft of 10 questions for care recipients, 10 questions for the care givers. And then we worked with a little organization that Bill works for called ATI to say, like, this is our first run at these questions, but let's get a panel of experts to come in and see, to make sure that we're a really unbiased, but also to see where the industry is and really kind of check in on that. In front of you, what you see is just a sample of how the questions came back for both. What you see here in front of you is the care recipient questions, and then I'll just give folks a minute to kind of read those, and then we can go to the next slide that talks about the survey of the care givers. And again, the survey is 10 questions long. I just have a kind of a sampling here, so we can go to the next slide. And this and Bill, I'd love for you to kind of I'll be quiet and have you talk a little bit about that process, because we really wanted to bring ATI in to make sure it was a well-rounded survey that we could feel comfortable with. So why don't you, if you don't mind, share a little bit about
Sure.
that?
Yeah, more than happy to. And just briefly, ATI is a firm that's nominally based in DC. We staff all over the country. We work on research and advisory and issues related to very complex questions related to healthcare. And so the long-term care industry is long a focus that the organization has had. And so when CareScout came to us, the ask was, we have an initial pass at the survey that we'd like to distribute for the sake of measuring person-centered care, but we want to make sure that there's a level of validity to it. And so what we proposed and what we have done in the past couple of months is we gathered an advisory panel of experts. So eight national experts from across the country representing all different sectors of the long-term care industry, representing both caregivers, bringing a level of diversity to the members of the panel, and making sure that we had a well-rounded group of voices who were weighing in on this. And we put the initial survey questions in front of them. And we said, let's talk about these and let's understand where there may be gaps in the level of person-centeredness and the way we're surveying person-centered care in the long-term care industry. And they had incredibly insightful findings for us. So the results are CareScout is maintaining 2 surveys, 10 questions each, straightforward, relatively simple. Like Philip mentioned, one is client facing or care recipient facing, and the other is provider facing. And so among the findings were a really strong level of support for surveying that frontline staff, right? So when you think of surveys of providers, I think they're often administered to the leadership at the provider organization, who is going to say, yes, we have a policy of instituting person-centered care. But if you survey the frontline staff, they are actually able to say, on a day-to-day basis, this is how we're delivering person-centered care. So really strong support for administering the survey to frontline staff. Another one of the findings was avoid jargon, industry jargon, or inside baseball language. And so one of the things that you won't see, Philip, I was checking just to make sure, and I think the final
Keep us
version.
honest.
So you won't see terms like care team in here, right? And this is because the panel said that if you ask a care recipient who their care team is or how the support provided by the care team was, they don't necessarily know who that is. They know the frontline nurse or the home health aide who is coming to see them every day, and that's who resonates with them. So focus on who the care support that they know is and use that terminology. Another was, making sure that staff are able to think beyond just the day-to-day interactions that they have with the care recipients that they're working with, and that they're ready for supporting them through care transitions. So you see, especially for folks who are receiving long-term care services, they are often going through care transitions where they're going from setting to setting, or level of care to the next, the greater level of care that goes beyond what they're currently receiving. And so to the extent that you're able to support that frontline staff and helping someone think through the transitions that will take place in their care, it's a really critical element of delivering person-centered care. And the last one that I'd raise, and maybe the most obvious, but is making sure that there's a level of cultural competency and understanding really the people that they are working with. So giving them some of those, I think of so many aspects of person-centered care as soft skills rather than hard skills. So making sure the folks who work at the long-term care providers have those soft skills that allow them to be vulnerable with the care recipients, to step into that place of potential discomfort, to celebrate all the diversity that these folks bring to the table. And so I think in the final version of the survey, these things will all be reflected to more meaningfully address and assess long-term care in the providers that CareScout is working with.
And Bill, my reaction was I found very interesting when we originally put out the survey. It was asking the care recipients I, and they really felt strongly about switching to my peers and coworkers and my employer. Can you chat a little bit about that? Because I thought that was also very interesting, at least.
Yeah, of course. So, when you survey someone and you ask about them, there's this instinctual reaction that they are being assessed in some way, that their practices are going to be monitored through the use of the survey. And so, what the panel told us is that if you ask about peers and coworkers, it all of a sudden becomes this collective consideration where they're thinking about organizationally, how are we doing these things? And so it's not pointing a finger, and it's not asking how are you doing these things. It's saying how are you as an organization? And when you look at your peers, are they doing these things? Are they trying to better understand and taking the extra time that's necessary to understand the full history that their care recipients are bringing to the table? So I think it was a great insight that the panel shared, and a really helpful pivot in terms of the language that's included in the final survey.
If I could offer a bit of just perspective of hearing this and kind of seeing these questions and hearing you talk about that, Bill, one of the things that really stands out to me is, and this is, I think, inherent in much of what I've talked about today, which is long-term care is a relationship. It is not a healthcare transaction. And when you mentioned the words soft skills, and I'd probably change that around to say that it's more about relationship building skills, and that it's like water. Water shapes, water moisturizes, water nourishes. And that when you add water to a situation that feels like there's a grind in between, two sides of that equation, it can soften out the rough spots and allow things to flow. And so much of what I'm seeing here in the questions that you're offering is that honoring of that relationship building that's going on, that can feel soft to the individual, which is exactly what you want it to be, but is really, really hard energy and powerful energy to bring to these relationships that are not transactional. When home care and other types of long-term care services get to be transactional, that's when problems arise, because then it's no longer about the person and the care provider. It's about the checklist, and that's where I think that we fall off the cart.
Yeah, I like that expression. So we can go to the next slide because I'm watching my time here, and I think we're perfectly on time. So that's exciting. And now we're going to ask our moderator to take some questions in from the field.
Sure. Thank you, Philip. As
Thank
a
you.
reminder to everyone, please submit your questions using the Q&A tab to the left of your screen. We have lots of great questions today, and so we will try to get to as many as possible. Let's start here with this question. I'm going to ask Bill to respond. So, Bill, this says person-centered care aspects are currently offered in some MA plans via new non-medical supplemental benefits, and CMMI launched the guide demonstration for Medicare beneficiaries. So more of a response than a question. So I don't know if you want to respond to that.
Yeah, of course. I spend a lot of time on these topics. So thanks for raising that. So the first being the Medicare Advantage supplemental benefits. So in the last 5 years or so, Medicare Advantage plans, private insurers who are functioning and operating Medicare plans for individuals across the country, they now account for roughly half of enrollment in Medicare. But they were given the flexibility by CMS and by Congress to allow for non-medical supplemental benefits. And the idea behind these benefits was really to recognize the full spectrum of needs that individuals have. So very comprehensively going beyond healthcare and being able to address food insecurity and housing insecurity and transportation needs. And so these benefits are very much designed to be person-centered. So plans identify the needs that their populations have and then try to use these flexibilities to address those needs with these new supplemental benefits. So it's a great point that there is a level of person-centeredness there. And then the guide model was just announced. I think the request for applications actually came out yesterday.
Yesterday, yeah.
Yeah, so the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation within CMS, the federal agency, is tasked with bringing new ideas to healthcare that improve quality and reduce costs. And so the guide model is focused on the population that has dementia. And for the first time, there was a clear recognition in the model and funding made available for caregivers of individuals with dementia. And so this is a really significant step that CMS and CMMI are taking in recognizing that the health of an individual depends on things beyond just the individual. And so in the case of individuals with dementia, so often some type of family caregiver is involved. So they are trying to recognize and address that as part of the solutions that they bring to the table. Gretchen, anything you'd add there?
Oh, I think you hit it right on the head. It's so exciting to see these care delivery transformations happening, both in the Medicare Advantage program, which is gaining traction nationwide. I think we have about 50% of all Medicare beneficiaries are in a Medicare Advantage plan of some form. And then also seeing Medicare writ large really take this huge step, particularly in the guide program and many other aspects of the work of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation to embrace person-centeredness, to acknowledge that it can look different operationally in different settings of care and through different care experiences like dementia and the like, and seeing it really round out together. So I really appreciate the comment from the audience around these two transformations, much of which came out of legislation in 2018. So like, wow, almost at the, what are we at, this close to the 6-year mark here. So
Excellent. Thank you both. This next question is for Gretchen. How can home-based care be affordable?
Short question and a very big question in a few words. Thank you for that. There are things to talk about on the affordability end, certainly, but it can't actually be a conversation about affordability until we actually know at the individual level what a person needs. Home-based care is not one thing. It can think, for a family caregiver who's stepping into this realm, that it may be just like this one big box of services, and I just, call and this home-based care experience shows up. But what really matters is what is needed by that older individual, what is needed to support and kind of physically and emotionally and spiritually nourish that individual and their family caregivers to walk through the experience based on what's happening with that older person. And so to be able to marry the cost of care relative to what is actually needed is the first step at the individual level. At the system level, there's a lot of conversations around, how to address affordability issues and long-term care writ large, whether it be the special supplemental benefits kind of world inside of MA expanding, as we've just talked about, whether it be, increased access to palliative types of care when people are in a position where the illness is really taking hold, but they're not at a hospice level yet. And what are the supports that could happen in that space and time? There's a lot of different pathways to meet people's home-based care needs. But fundamentally, when we return to the individual, it has to be grounded in what they actually need. Most people, even people with extremely heavy care needs, generally do not need 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, somebody sitting next to their bed type of care. And there are people who definitely need that at every moment, but many, many people do not. And so finding that sweet spot really matters, and marrying them up with what their total resource package means, including caregiver support, family, friends, neighbors, and other kinds of benefits.
Thank you for that,
And
Gretchen.
I would just
Bill.
add briefly there, it's I don't want to minimize what is a massive question, and this could be coming from someone who is dealing with a family member who needs home-based care, and finds the magnificent cost of it. But I think there is an aspect in bringing it back to person-centered care. There's an aspect of thinking about the short game and the long game, right? And so I think to the extent that you can find these providers who offer person-centered care, there is the potential that you can put off those institutional stays for a longer period of time. And so the cost of those is really significant when you compare it to home-based care and receiving care in someone's home. So to the extent that you can take advantage of really high quality person-centered care in the home, it can push off some of those longer term costs as well.
Thank you both. This next question is for Philip. Does the CareScout Quality Network include non-clinical providers, i.e. assisted living, memory care, daycare, non-medical caregiving agencies, or is the focus weighted on clinical organizations focused on data outcomes and CMS measures due to long-term care policy and approved providers?
So we are including all long-term care providers, which would be nursing facilities, assisted living, home care, adult foster. So they're all going to be invited. We are starting out with home care. I think maybe when they said clinical, more home care and assistance in the home. Some people call it homemaker services as opposed to like home health and nurses. But all will be brought under the CareScout Network umbrella. So it's not weighted specifically to clinical. It's much more just about considering the long-term care journey from just, assistance with things at the home all the way through to nursing facility.
Thank you. And I think this will be our last question. It's a two-parter for Philip again. How is your service paid, and how do providers know about your service and how to prescribe to it or subscribe to it?
So how they know about it is this was not a CareScout commercial. This is a webinar about person-centered care, but I talked a little bit about CareScout in the beginning. And the next slide will actually show folks the where they can go to find out more information about it. We're launching kind of like you would state by state. So if you go to the website, you can get a lot of information on getting involved. Again, we're focusing on home care throughout the nation first, and then we're going to build the building blocks of the other providers. And CareScout's first customer is Genworth, which is a long-term care insurance that we're a part of. So that's the first customer of our service, but we're hoping that we're really going to be kind of reinventing education around long-term care, and that we're going to have many different folks coming and using our platform to gain insight. The way I look at it is, so it's not such a scary process when you have a loved one aging. We really want it to be a home for people to come to understand what they're heading towards. And in my own life, like my friends that have aging parents have no idea what they're coming to. So if we can avoid like what my right question is, you shaking your head like, and you want to kind of like, if when you're in the field, be like, are you ready? Because you're not. But it's difficult. Those are difficult conversations when it's not your family. But we're hoping that CareScout can alleviate some of that crisis intervention and get folks to come to the platform earlier. So it's not just like, oh my God, nursing home for my mom. Well, wait, did you do any home adaptations? You haven't done anything yet. Hang on. So that kind of feeling, and Gretchen, I don't know if you want to, you have a lot of experience in this too, but we're really hoping to get to people earlier when they get to the platform.
Thank you for bringing that up. I think folks are in the moment of that experience, right? They're hungry for, what do I do now? But the truth is that every individual experience is a beacon of light for the network that they're a part of. So, I think about a friend of mine who has just experienced the loss of a parent. Her journey is a beacon of light for other people in my age group who will lose their parents. That is likely just simply because of the age that we're in. And so, and walk along that long-term care journey. And so the more and more and more there are pathways for people to appreciate what are the top 10 biggest things that I should be thinking about as a caregiver, as a family member, as a daughter, to walk along those pathways and know that there are people who have done that as well. That brings such sense of peace and hope and consideration along those ways. So I think that's my excitement about products, and platforms like this, like daughterhood.org, many kinds of discussion places where people, that this is a bigger conversation than just that 3 a.m. thought inside of their own head when they wake up and say, oh, dear God, I forgot to call mom and I got to call and I'm worried and this and that, and I got to get on the airplane, and they just, spin out inside their own mind. There are places where people can plug in to get some support and answers.
Yeah, thank you. That was a perfect ending to this seminar. But go ahead. I didn't mean to steal your thunder, Jenna. Go ahead.
No, not at all. I appreciate all the responses. And that was our final question. We did have a lot of great questions today. Couldn't get to them all, but we will try our best to get back to everyone who submitted personally after the webinar. And if we could look at slide 17 here, we just wanted to thank everyone for attending this Fierce Healthcare webinar and submitting so many of those great questions. I'd like to thank our speakers for participating and CareScout for presenting today's webinar. Just a reminder, to access additional resources from today's presentation, please click the Handouts tab button on the left side of your screen. CareScout will be launching a new website next week with resources for long-term care providers and industry leaders. You'll find blogs, white papers, and more. And then next week, CareScout will send an email follow-up to today's session that will include more details. So in closing, a recorded version of this webinar, again, will be provided and available to you to access within 24 hours using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. Thank you again for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.